Bridgette sat on the edge of her sister Helena's couch, staring blankly at the muted TV screen. It had been a year since her divorce, but the anxiety had only deepened. In a life that once seemed perfectly orchestrated, marriage, a well-established career, a beautiful house, everything now felt out of control. It was as if the universe had conspired to conduct her own symphony of sorrow. The constant tension in her chest, the inability to relax, the sinking feeling that time was slipping away, all pointed to one thing that she could no longer ignore. She was drowning. Bridgette had always been the pillar of strength in her family. As a lawyer, she was accustomed to high-pressure situations, quick decisions, and demanding clients. Her life had been structured, predictable, and most importantly, in her control. Till it wasn't. When Derek, her ex-husband, had made the decision to take the house and their dog, Max, Bridgette's once stable life had started to crumble. She had to leave the home she'd spent years creating, moving into her younger sister Helena's apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only option. At 42, Bridgette had always imagined her life would look different by now. Her professional achievements had always come with a sense of fulfillment, but now, in the wake of her divorce, those achievements felt hollow. The house that she and Derek had carefully curated no longer existed in her world, replaced by a small, overcrowded apartment. A 10-year-old niece, Grace, filled the space with her laughter, but the noise only highlighted Bridgette's growing disconnection from the life she once knew. Every day, she struggled to find her footing in this new chapter, where uncertainty loomed at every corner. The anxiety crept in like an uninvited guest, unrelenting and suffocating. It was the constant hum in her mind, the panic attacks that hit when she was alone, the nights she spent staring into the abyss of her own anxiety, overwhelmed by an unbearable weight. There was nowhere to run from it, no way to escape the spiraling thoughts that convinced her that she had lost everything: her marriage, her home, and now her sense of self. Before the divorce, Bridgette had been confident, balanced, and fully in control. Her relationship with Derek, though not perfect, had been steady and predictable. They had their up and downs, of course, but she had always believed they would grow as one. Together, they had bought a house in a quiet suburb of Chicago, a space that had become the backdrop to their lives. Bridgette worked long hours at her law firm, but they made it work. Weekends were spent in the garden with Derek grilling on the porch while she watered the flowers. It was simple, but it was enough. But over time, the cracks in their marriage deepened, unnoticed by Bridgette until they couldn't be ignored. The endless work hours, the lack of communication, growing distance, it was all there, if she had been brave enough to see it. Derek had moved out first, and when he filed for divorce, Bridgette was blindsided. The house, once a symbol of their shared dreams, became the catalyst for their undoing. With it, Bridgette lost not only a physical space, but the illusion of the future she had worked so hard to build. Now, as she looked back at those years, she couldn't help but feel betrayed by the very life she had fought to create. The reality was that she had been living in a bubble, and once it burst, she was left with nothing but the weight of her own insecurity. Every time she saw a married couple, every time she caught a glimpse of the life she had left behind, the anxiety would resurface, suffocating her. She had no idea how to move forward. The past was gone, and the future felt like a distant and unreachable dream. The first sign that Bridgette's life was about to take a new turn came on a cold, quiet morning in February. She had been meeting with her therapist, Dr. Fisher, for weeks to talk about her anxiety, but the breakthroughs were few and far between. On this day, however, something shifted. Dr. Fisher, with her calm and steady demeanor, suggested that Bridgette might be holding herself back from healing by constantly focusing on the past. She asked Bridgette a question that could change everything. What would it look like if you gave yourself permission to start over? To really embrace the idea of a fresh beginning? The question lingered in Bridgette's mind long after she left the office. She wasn't ready to let go of her old life. her old identity. But something about that question, the idea of starting over, sparked a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild. She wasn't sure what that looked like yet, but it felt like the first step towards something new. Her life had been turned upside down, and yet, for the first time, Bridgette wondered if that was exactly what she needed. That night, as she lay in the small guest room at Helena's apartment, again, staring into the abyss of her own anxiety, Bridgette made a decision. She would face the anxiety and the uncertainty. She would begin the process of rebuilding herself, even if it terrified her. Little did she know that this decision would be the first step on a journey of self-discovery, one that would push her to confront the anxiety that had been quietly consuming her. The next few weeks were filled with a quiet resistance. Despite the hope that had sparked inside her, Bridgette found herself retreating back into the old patterns of avoidance. She threw herself into work, taking on more cases than she could handle. It was easy to immerse herself in the demands of her job. After all, work didn't require confronting the gnawing discomfort that came with her anxiety. She could stay busy, keep moving forward, and pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. The panic attacks grew more frequent. The anxiety crept into her professional life too. Bridgette found herself questioning her every decision, second-guessing her abilities, and doubting whether she was good enough for her clients. The physical symptoms were hard to ignore. Tightness in her chest, a racing heartbeat, an overwhelming sense of dread. She knew something needed to change, but facing the unknown terrified her more than the anxiety itself. It was easier to run from the problem than to confront it head-on. One night, after a particularly difficult day at work, Bridgette sat down with Helena and, for the first time, opened up about how she was feeling. "I don't know how to move forward, Hel. I'm not sure I can," she admitted, her voice shaking. Helena, ever supportive, told her that it was okay to be scared, that she couldn't keep hiding. "You've got to face it, Bridge. You've been running for too long." But Bridgette wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she could face her fears, let alone overcome them. It was a Sunday morning, late in March, when Bridgette ran into an old friend from law school, Emma. Though they hadn't seen each other in years, but, as fate would have it, they both found themselves at a local cafe, sipping coffee and catching up. Emma had always been a source of wisdom in Bridgette's life, and over the years, she had become a successful therapist, helping clients work through their own emotional challenges. As they spoke, Emma mentioned how she had recently gone through a tough breakup herself, and how she had worked hard to rebuild her life afterward. Bridgette felt a glimmer of hope, hearing Emma talk so openly about her journey. "It's not easy," Emma said, "but you can't keep letting the past dictate your future. You've got to give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling, but then you have to let it go. The real work starts when you stop running." Bridgette, in a moment of reflection, realized that Emma was right. She had been running from the truth about herself, about her anxiety, about her fears. It was time to face it, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it felt. Bridgette left that conversation with a renewed sense of determination. Emma's words lingered in her mind as she returned to Helena's apartment. Bridgette didn't know what it meant to let go of her anxiety, but she was determined to try. The following week, she made an appointment with Dr. Fisher again, this time with a renewed sense of commitment. She no longer wanted to keep ignoring the emotions that had been weighing her down for so long. The next few months would be filled with difficult conversations, uncomfortable realizations, and the hardest work she had ever done. But she was ready. The first breakthrough came in a session where Dr. Fisher gently asked Bridgette to close her eyes and picture herself standing in front of her old house, the house that Derek had taken. The emotions that rushed over her were overwhelming. She could feel the grief and the anger, but they felt just as fresh as the day she had packed her bags and walked out. But this time, Dr. Fisher didn't let her run. She guided Bridgette through the exercise, helping her to acknowledge the pain and to sit with it instead of avoiding it. You don't have to carry this forever, Dr. Fisher said, but you do need to feel it to release it. For the first time in a long time, Bridgette allowed herself to feel everything: the loss, the anger, the fear. Afterward, Bridgette sat in her car, letting the tears flow freely. It wasn't the relief she had expected, but a kind of raw honesty with herself that felt like the beginning of something significant. She wasn't fixed yet, and the road ahead would be long, but she knew with a deep sense of clarity that she had crossed the threshold into confronting her anxiety rather than letting it control her. As the weeks passed, Bridgette began to confront her emotions in more deliberate ways. She started meditating every morning, taking time to sit in the stillness and observe her thoughts instead of letting them consume her. Some days were easier than others. The anxiety didn't magically disappear, but she found that by creating a space for herself to acknowledge it, it lost some of its power. On good days, Bridgette felt like she was making progress. On bad days, the anxiety would still take over, but she had learned not to judge herself for it. She found support from unexpected places. Helena, her sister, who had always been a quiet listener, became her sounding board in new ways. Though they had lived together for a year, it wasn't until this journey that Bridgette truly understood how much Helena had been there for her. She was no longer just a sister who made dinner or helped with Grace. Helena became the ally Bridgette needed, encouraging her to keep going, reminding her that it was okay to struggle. On weekends, they would go on long walks where Bridgette would talk openly about her fears and Helena would listen without offering solutions. It was a quiet but powerful form of support. But there were also enemies: self-doubt, criticism, and a part of Bridgette that constantly feared she would never be good enough. Those were the hardest battles. It was easy to feel like a failure in the face of her anxiety, as though her inability to get better meant she was weak. But slowly, Bridgette began to challenge those inner voices. She wasn't defined by her struggles. Instead, she was learning to navigate them, one step at a time. Months passed, and Bridgette began to feel a shift within herself. Constant anxiety was still there, but it no longer held her captive. The real test, however, came during a high-stakes case at work, a case she had been preparing for weeks. Everything that could go wrong did. She was exhausted, pressure was mounting, and one particularly difficult day, she felt a panic attack brewing. For a moment, Bridgette considered walking away. It would have been easier to give in, to let the anxiety take control, to abandon the fight. But she remembered something Dr. Fisher had said: "You are not your anxiety." In that moment, standing in a courthouse hallway, Bridgette took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers, but she had come too far to turn back now. She decided to face the fear head on, acknowledging the tightness in her chest, but not letting it define her actions. With trembling hands, she walked back into the courtroom, sat at her desk, and began to work with renewed focus. It wasn't perfection, it was progress. As the days wore on, Bridgette realized she had reached the emotional climax of her journey. The anxiety was still there, but she had learned to coexist with it. Panic attacks, while still present, no longer had the power to dictate her every move. She wasn't cured, but she was no longer a captive of her own emotions. Bridgette had found a new resilience within herself, one that allowed her to continue moving forward despite the anxiety. However, just when she thought she had gained control, Bridgette faced a devastating setback. One night, while working late, she received an email from Derek. The subject line was simple: Max. The message was brief, but loaded with meaning. Derek had decided to move out of state, taking Max with him. The thought of losing their dog, once a bright light in the chaos of her life, sent Bridgette into a spiral. Grief and anxiety came rushing back with an intensity that she hadn't felt in months. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything she had worked for, her healing, her progress, seemed to shatter in an instant. For the first time in a long time, Bridgette thought about giving up. She felt as though she had lost everything again. To some, pet is just that, pet. But for Bridgette, Max had consistently brought her joy, and now even that was slipping away. In a deep moment of despair, Bridgette retreated from everyone. She didn't talk to Helena. She didn't go to work. She spent days in bed, overwhelmed by the weight of the world. The anxiety had returned with vengeance. It took Bridgette days to pull herself together, and it wasn't easy. As she lay in bed on the fourth day of self-imposed isolation, a thought crossed her mind. She had been here before. She had faced the darkest parts of herself, had struggled with the loss of her marriage, her home, and her identity. And she had survived. This too would pass. A breakthrough came when she realized that her healing wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about learning how to navigate it. She didn't need to push the grief away or pretend it didn't matter. Instead, she needed to allow herself to feel the hurt, to acknowledge the fear, and then move forward one step at a time. Bridgette wasn't going to fix everything. Life wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. She would survive this in the same manner she had survived everything before it. When she reached out to Helena, the relief was palpable. Talking through the pain, Bridgette realized that though she couldn't control the circumstances, she could control her reaction. She could choose to keep going, even in the face of loss. That realization, simple as it was, felt like a reward, like the first breath of fresh air after a storm. In the weeks that followed, Bridgette began to rebuild her life once more, but this time with a deeper understanding of herself. She had learned that healing was not a linear journey. It was full of setbacks, moments of clarity, and moments of despair. The panic attacks didn't stop entirely, but they grew less frequent. When they did come, Bridgette had new tools to manage them. She could ground herself in the present moment, focus on her breath, and remind herself that she was not defined by her anxiety. She also began to redefine her relationship with Derek and Max. Though it broke her heart to let Max go, Bridgette knew she couldn't control Derek's choices. What she could control was how to love Max from afar. She asked Derek if he could periodically send her updates on Max's well-being. It wasn't the same as seeing him every day, but Bridgette knew it had to be enough. In the process, Bridgette came to accept that she didn't have to hold on tightly to everything in order to feel connected to the people she loved. Work too began to feel less like an overwhelming pressure. Bridgette took on fewer cases, recognizing that balance was more important than ambition. She still had the same drive and passion for her career, but she didn't have to prove anything anymore. She was learning to prioritize her mental and emotional health. It was a delicate balancing act, but Bridgette was slowly finding her rhythm again. Months later, a pivotal moment arrived in the form of an unexpected encounter with Derek. He called Bridgette to ask if they could meet for coffee. She was surprised and a little hesitant. Their interactions had been minimal since the divorce, and this felt like a step into unfamiliar territory. But instead of avoiding it, Bridgette decided to face it head on. When they sat down, the conversation was more civil than she had expected. Derek spoke about his new life, his move, and the challenges of starting over. What surprised Bridgette the most was how she had changed. Her anger had subsided, her heartache had softened. She no longer saw him as a source of her pain, but as another person on their own journey. When he apologized for the way things had ended, Bridgette could feel her past with him, the bitterness, the resentment, start to melt away. She could forgive him, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved peace. The real test came when Derek casually mentioned that Max was having a tough time with the move. "He misses you a lot," he said. The weight of those words hit Bridgette hard. She had spent so much time trying to protect herself from the pain of losing Max that she hadn't fully realized the impact it had on him. It was a sobering moment. Bridgette knew the best way to move forward was to embrace her vulnerability. Derek made a promise to her. No matter how far away they were, he would send regular updates on his well-being. For Bridgette, this conversation was a form of resurrection. She was no longer the woman who lived in fear of her emotions. She had embraced them, processed them, and was now ready to move forward with a new understanding of herself and her relationships. It was a year later, on the anniversary of her divorce, that Bridgette realized just how much she had changed. She was sitting on a bench by Lake Michigan, watching the sun set over the water. In the distance, she could see families walking together, couples laughing, children playing. The noise of the world felt distant, peaceful. Bridgette had come a long way since that moment when anxiety had taken over her life. She had learned that it was okay to feel broken, and that healing was about embracing that brokenness rather than running from it. Anxiety no longer defined her. It was just one part of her journey. Her work, her relationships, and most importantly, her relationship with herself had transformed. Bridgette had learned how to accept her imperfections and embrace her vulnerability as strength, not weakness. Her transformation wasn't just internal. Bridgette had begun sharing her experiences with others, opening up about her anxiety, struggles, and the lessons she had learned along the way. At the law firm, she began mentoring younger attorneys, offering them not just career advice, but emotional support, teaching them that mental health and personal growth were just as important as professional success. Bridgette had become a source of inspiration for those around her. She had embraced her journey, every difficult, painful, and beautiful step of it. And now, she shared the gift of healing with others. Her message was simple, yet powerful. You don't have to have all the answers to keep moving forward. You just have to keep going. As she sat there by the lake, Bridgette took a deep breath, feeling the calmness of the moment seep into her soul. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. The journey wasn't over, but she knew that she was strong enough to face whatever came next. And that, in itself, was enough.